The outfield is a very stacked position, and there are a ton of really good options in Diamond Dynasty. Today, we're going to rank all of the best options that you can use and help you decide who you should actually be using in your outfield. There are a couple of things we got to go through before I actually hop into the list because there are so many outfielders. First of all, I didn't include every single outfielder, only 90 plus rated players. Players below 90 overall are going to be good for theme teams or captain boosts. I don't picture many people using them in the long run, so I decided to cut that off at 90 overall so we have some beginner game cards as we work our way up towards those 99s. And since there's so many cards and so many cards above 90 overall, you'll see some cards a little lower on this tier list in comparison to other lists. And I'm going to be generalizing a lot because there's so many outfielders. I can't really talk about every single one of their attributes. So we're going to touch on a few cards in each tier. But beginning the tier list in the F tier, you see a lot of beginner game cards. There are guys like Dwight Britton who are a little bit contact heavy. We don't have that much power. Actually could be pretty good as a starter outfielder, but I don't picture really using that long. You have guys like Tyler O'Neill and Lars Nootbaar who could be good for some lower difficulty games as you're beginning ranked. Once you get towards Hall of Fame, the lack of contact is definitely going to hurt them a bit. We jump up to our D tier. You see a couple better 90 overall options like Cespedes and Nelson Cruz and Kyle Schwarber who have hitting but are really bad defensively. So if you're going to use them in the very beginning in the outfield. You're not going to be able to deal with that really low fielding for that long. Guys like Mookie Betts or Yoshida or Danny Valencia have some more well-rounded attributes I think could play a little bit above some of the other 90 overalls in the lower tier, but again, don't have that much to really be worthwhile in the outfield. But as you see in our D and F tier, these will mostly be your starter cards. I recommend going for some D tier guys, but again, you won't be using cards of this tier for that long in the grand scheme of things. You're gonna probably replace them with some more 95, 97 overalls. We jump up to our C tier. I have a bunch of the captain cards like Judge, McCutchen, and Byron Buxton. We look at Aaron Judge, and I will say the power is great, and he gets a little better contact than someone like Byron Buxton, but the defense is bad, mainly that 48 reaction. It just is going to be a detriment in the outfield. This card is better off as a DH. And you look at some of the cards in this tier, there is one general weakness that they have, like McCutchen being weak versus righties, Harper being weak versus lefties, Byron Buxton lacking in the contact, where you're not going to plan on using them too long. You play on like all-star difficulty if you're just building your team off the rip and doing team affinity. The captains in here are actually very good uses and swings and players that people have liked, but you're going to replace not too long in the process with some, say, charisma cards or some other World Baseball Classic outfielders that are more well-rounded on the attribute. I have a couple of the 90 overall WBC cards like Juan Soto, Ron Acuna Jr., who have some pretty good swings and enough on the hitting and defense to be worth using a little bit longer. But again, you're not going to use them that long into the process, especially if you end up getting the better charisma cards for both of these guys. And last, I want to cover Shohei because yes, you could use him as a two-way player and he's good in that sense, but you probably don't want to start this man in the field with 62 fielding. It'll actually be less than that if you move him to the outfield. He's a lot like Byron Buxton on the hitting, and a good inside edge day would be great. But again, this is the type of player that you don't want to use in the long term in the field. The fielding is definitely going to cause you some problems. And in general, the C tier are good cards to actually start using if you want to begin playing ranked. You want to start playing on those veteran all-star difficulty games and try to outslug your opponents, but you probably aren't targeting in the long run on your team where you're trying to make World Series and say Hall of Fame or such. We slide up to our B tier. A lot of charisma cards end up sliding in here. Starting off with Adolis Garcia, I think he's in a similar category to say Taylor Ward and Tommy Edman, where the defense and speed is pretty nice. And the hitting could be pretty good, but I don't know how I feel about Adolis Garcia cards in general and if people love them. If you do well with his swing, he will certainly play up to an A tier card, no doubt. But in my opinion, most people won't end up liking him like that. Just be a good outfielder that you could end up using for a bit. We have some guys like Aaron Judge where his live series card is definitely better, but the same problem remains, the defense. It's going to cost you. And then we have some contact type hitters like Craig Biggio here, who actually would be pretty solid in the outfield. I think his best position is going to end up being second base or catcher. Just in general, the contact type hitter that he is pretty good. But I feel like a Jeff McNeil is better off with the slightly more power and I think a little bit more on the quirk side than Biggio gets. I will say a lot of people have liked Biggio here. If you do need to find a way to get him in the lineup, you could slide him in the outfield and he will be fine. And overall, in this B tier, They are certainly good cards to really start using in terms of the hitting. I would only be using them in the outfield if you can't put them in the DH or in their best positions. If you have to get them in your lineup and move them to a secondary position or make it work, you could definitely use these B tier guys. Now we jump up to the A tier. I want to talk about specifics here because this is really going to be the group of cards that you want to use when you're trying to make World Series. Starting off with Giancarlo Stanton, we have a couple really big bats in here like Stanton, Eloy Jimenez, Juan Soto, Joey Meneses, Jock Peterson, where you're getting some really big offense out of that spot. And if you do very well with them offensively and you need that power hitter, all of those guys are going to do that well. However, their big problem is they're a little slow and don't have that great of fielding rating. So you throw them in the outfield, balls will land and get past them, especially with Stanton with 60 reaction. But if you're getting this level of hitting, that's a player that I think is worth the risk of throwing in the outfield. But he's just not going to be a good fielder. There are not that many really stacked hitters, so you might want to consider having one in your outfield. We have some guys like Cedric Mullins and Christian Yelich and Ronald Acuna Jr., Jung-Ho Lee. We're all more well-rounded on the attributes. Seti is a little bit more on the defensive side. Yelich gets a little bit more hitting at the expense of defense, but is a little quicker where he makes plays still. And there's some like middle-of-the-road 5-tool type player outfielders where they don't have that bad of anything. Could definitely be very good, like Cedric Mullins rakes. We all know this. So you could use this card in your outfield and find a lot of success still. And any of these guys, I think, are definitely good, more safe options. They have enough speed usually to make more plays in the outfield. And then last in this tier, we have guys like Randy Arozarena, who actually have a little better defense. However, they're usually sacrificing some of their hitting to make that work. Like Randy is a little weaker versus righties. You have a Jeff McNeil, who is going to be pretty good defensively, but just doesn't have the most power, but still plays pretty well despite it. Cards like this are good options if you really want to play safe on the defense. Defense is a big problem in the outfield when you have low reaction and really slow outfielders. If you want to go for the defense or throw one of these guys on your bench for a defensive sub, there is still a place for these guys and they are very good uses. And as you see in this A tier, a lot of those cards fit into one of those categories. You got to find the options that work the best for you. I would say in center field, put your speediest outfielder with hopefully good fielding. And then in left field, put that worst fielder if you have it. Maybe look for someone who's a little bit of an in-between in right field. But in this A tier, this is going to end up being the outfield bunch that most people end up using for a while. And obviously they won't start in every outfield, but I think a combination of these players will get the job done for you. But of course, we have a lot of S tier outfielders. It's very tough to categorize them with much detail because we have so many good cards, but I think the 99s are pretty obviously the ones we want to shoot for. But again, they all kind of have the similar category thing like we've talked about in the A tier. For example, Babe Ruth is definitely a offensive first outfielder. The defense sucks, and ideally you play him at say first base or DH, but that bat is so good if you have to get him in, put him in the outfield. No outfielder is going to have hitting really even that close. And then guys like Babe and Mark McGwire and Jordan Walker are all good hitters with, you know, not great defense. But I think they're the type of power guys you want to target for the outfield, where they're going to make enough plays in the outfield with really good hitting, where that sacrifice is definitely worth it. Then we have more of the 5-tooly type players like Corbin Carroll, Jazz Chisholm, Trey Turner, where you're going to get some pretty solid hitting. Maybe in Trey Turner's case, you sacrifice some fielding, but you just get a little bit more hitting out of it. Corbin Carroll sacrificed a little bit of the hitting for more fielding and speed. There is some option here that you could run in center field with some really good speed and get some pretty well-rounded hitting out of them. And then, of course, you have some guys who are literally 5-tool players like Mike Trout, Kyle Tucker kind of, and of course, Sammy Sosa, where they just bring good defense, speed, and overall hitting, where it's like, you're probably going to want to target 3 players like this for your 3 outfielders. They're going to be good enough fielders. They're going to be great hitters to be at any part in your order. And they have some of the favorite swings in the game. So in this S tier, there are a lot of studs. I think the top outfielders really include Babe Ruth, Mike Trout, Sammy Sosa, Kyle Tucker, and then probably Trey Turner as an outfield option. I think those guys are going to be the ones people want to use the most. But I think this S tier is a little bit above that A tier because of the overall hitting they bring, or at least the combination of hitting and defense that they all bring. And I think are probably the outfielders you're going to want to target for making the best of best tier. I would love to have an S plus tier on this list, but I think those two are going to be the ones you target the most in Diamond Dynasty right now. The outfield list is definitely a little bit different because there are so many cards and it's tough to be specific. But if you guys want to see more tier list stuff like this, I think what I might do is do a top 5 cards at every position at some point, or something of that sort, where I rank cards based on their position, so you know which are the few best cards you should probably be looking towards first. But I appreciate you all watching these tier lists. I'll see you all again on the next one.